transfer our mandala designs onto the clay, and eventually we'll learn about the sgraffito technique and how to scratch it in there and get that design looking really nice and pretty. But first, we gotta stretch this out. So a few things that you're gonna need is, of course, you're gonna need your clay. You're gonna need some kind of paper plate. This is just a regular old Dixie paper plate. You can use styrofoam as well, it doesn't really matter. You can use a plastic tray, just something that you can use as your mold. Then you're gonna want your needle tool or an X-Acto knife or something that you can actually cut around the clay with. You're gonna need your rib tool, a sponge, and then here in the studio, we are going to use our slab roller. So before we can do any of that though, we've gotta go ahead and compress this clay just a little bit more, get it stretched out so it will fit on the plate, and then we'll run it through the slab roller. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I need to get this clay a little bit thinner before I start stretching it, because this is just way too thick, and I know that. So before I start throwing it down on my wedging table here, I'm just going to spray this with a little bit of water because it probably has a lot of dust on it from previous work. So we're going to go ahead and just mist it down a little bit. Then you're going to take your clay and you're just going to throw it down on each side. And it does seem a little bit loud, but you're not doing anything wrong. So we're going to do both sides. And then at this point, we can start stretching it. And when you start stretching your clay, what you're going to do is you're going to throw the clay down, but when it touches the table, you're going to pull it towards you. So it's kind of this motion of like your cross-country skiing. That's what I kind of always say it kind of looks like. So you're doing like one of these sorts of motions. And it feels a little bit awkward, but once you get into the habit of it, it feels normal. So just give it a minute. So I'm going to start doing it, and you'll start to see that the side of this clay is going to start to thin out. And notice that on my clay, it's getting a little bit of a ripple effect on the sides. So we want to go ahead and we want to stop, and we want to tap the sides of our slab so we don't get a whole bunch of cracks in it when we run it through the slab roller. So at this point, you can see that my slab has already thinned out. But now we want to make sure that it's wide enough that it's actually going to be able to fit our plate on top of it so we can trace around it. So in order to do that, to get a round slab, wherever the corners are, we're going to tap those inward. And now when we stretch it, we're going to stretch it the same way, but we're going to rotate the clay just slightly every time we do a stretch. So I'm just going to rotate it just a little bit, and I'm going to stretch it out. So rotate slightly and stretch. And if you start to kind of see where maybe it's a little bit more horizontal than round, then you can go ahead and turn your slab all the way to that section, and you can stretch it out there. But pay attention to the sides of your slab. So notice mine is getting a little bit uneven here, and it's going at a slope. So I know that I need to kind of stop and tap the edges of my slab so I don't get a whole bunch of cracks. We want to get as much surface area out of our slab as we possibly can. And if your slab starts to get like these lumps in it, just take your palm and just gently kind of tap them down. Now I'm going to take my plate and I'm going to check it on my slab, and I'm going to see if it's stretched out enough. And if it is, then you can go ahead and start running it through the slab roller. So my plate is definitely going to fit, so I'm ready to run it through our machine over here. And you really don't want to be running your slab through the slab roller, if it's more than probably, I would say, an inch thick. Because then you could break the cables on the slab roller. So at this point, I'm going to show you how to set up the slab roller in order to roll your clay through. Alright, so we're back here with the slab roller, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a piece of paper down to create a barrier between the canvas and your clay. So once you have your paper on the roller, you're going to take your clay that you stretched out and you're going to set it right on top of your paper as close to the roller as you can get it. So it's close to the roller. And then you're going to put another piece of paper right on top of your clay. Now if you're the only one using your slab roller, then you would probably be okay. But the more people that use it, the canvas would start to collect moisture and then your clay would eventually stick. So by adding the paper, you eliminate that. So make sure that this canvas piece is nice and straight, and then you're going to use the roller and you're just going to roll down your clay one time. The gauge is already set, so whether you do it 100 times or you do it once, it is not going to matter. You're going to get the same thickness, and then you're going to roll your slab back. Or I'm sorry, then you're going to roll the roller back. So at this point, you have your slab rolled out. So now we're ready to pick it up off the slab roller and transfer it to your table. There is an appropriate way to carry a slab, and if you don't do this, you're going to end up tearing your slab because gravity is working against you. So what you want to do is go ahead and take that first piece of paper off, and you can just put it in the recycling bin. The second piece of paper, just leave it on there. You can get it off there when you get it to your work table. So when you carry a slab, you want to carry it in between your hands. So one hand is going to go on the back side, and the other hand is going to go on the top, and you're just going to lift this straight off the slab roller so you have this happening. Gravity is on your side when you do it like this. If you hold it on both ends, you're going to end up tearing your clay. So at this point, you're going to take this over to your workspace, lay it with the side that does not have the paper on it. That way we can take that sheet of paper off. Table, we're ready to rib this. So we're just going to take our rib tool and we're just going to run it across the surface of our slab. I am not applying like a tremendous amount of pressure as I run this across the slab surface. I'm just kind of using the pressure, my hand weight to kind of, I guess, press down a little bit, but it's not like I'm trying to push down on the clay itself. And what I'm doing is I'm just checking for air pockets, and I'm doing an additional kind of compression of the clay, really. And if you have any air pockets or little air bubbles, you'll see them because they'll be on the surface of the clay. And if you do happen to run into any of those, if you have just a few, it's not a huge deal. You can pop them with your needle tool and continue to compress the clay. However, if you've got a whole bunch of little bubbles, air pockets happening, then you're not going to probably want to use that slab because the chances of you missing an air pocket is probably pretty high. So I would re-wedge and re-roll out your clay. So I'm going to use my hands, one on either side, to flip my slab. And I'm going to compress this side just like I did the other. that step completed, now you're gonna take your paper plate and we're gonna flip it over and we're gonna kind of place it on our slab where we want it. Now, if you have a smaller paper plate and you have a slab this large, you can probably get multiple plates out of this. I'm gonna just kind of check and see. Nope, my slab is just a little bit too small to get 2 plates this size, but what I could do is I could just do this one on this edge and then find a smaller stencil and I could still cut another, some type of design over here. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. So to make my slab just a little bit more manageable, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut this in half. And I'm gonna stay away from the edge of my plate because what's gonna happen is this slab's gonna drop down into the plate eventually, and you don't wanna leave yourself too short. So now at this point, what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep our paper plate upside down. I'm gonna take my needle tool and I'm gonna trace around the outside edge of my paper plate. But when I do this, I wanna make sure that my needle tool is straight up and down. So you don't wanna be at an angle when you cut around the paper stencil. You want to make sure that the needle is straight up and down, so going straight to the ceiling. And for whatever reason, I like to start on the far side. And because you're using a paper plate, you have to hold the edge or else it likes to curl up on you and then it will misshape the clay that you're cutting out. Once you have your pieces cut, you can take away your extra clay, and we're gonna wedge this clay up and we're gonna put it in our small bag. We do not wanna leave this in slab form. If you leave it in slab form, it's gonna dry out really fast. So I'm gonna kind of squeeze it up and then I'm gonna wedge it, place it in my bag, and spray it with some water. Okay, I should have mentioned that you're probably going to want to put your slab on top of a board after you ribbon and sponge it, just because it will make it easier for the next step. However, if you forget like I did, it's not a huge deal. Leave your paper plate on the circle that you cut out and then transfer it to a board. And the reason why is for the process that I'm going to show you right now. Because it's really difficult to take this slab with it basically your slab's the exact size of your paper plate right now, and if you try to flip this just with your hands, you're gonna mess it up. So by putting it on a board and then placing another board on top of it, taking it and very carefully make sure you're compressing and flipping, you now have it still evenly on your stencil and your mold, and it didn't move. And that's really what we want. At this point, we're going to pick up an edge of our slab because you basically have an air pocket between the plate and the clay. So you can see it kind of dip down as soon as I pick that up just slightly. You're going to take your sponge and you're going to gently make your way around the middle of the slab. And you don't have to pick up all the way around. You just need this one section picked up and you're able to push that air that's underneath the slab and in between the plate. You're able to push that out. And really what you're trying to do is get your slab to take on the shape of the paper plate. And just by gently, very gently, I'm not pressing really hard, I'm just gently pressing with my sponge. And I'm just making my way around the slab, pushing the clay into the paper plate. Once you feel like you have all the air out of the middle, you can go ahead and you can kind of just push that piece back down. And sometimes if you can't get all the air out in one little section, it's all right to kind of pick that edge up and press that air out of there. It's not going to hurt it. When you're doing this, make sure that you're not pushing really hard with your finger into this edge right here, because you do want it to be like a gradual slope. So it's not like we're trying to have a really hard 90-degree angle from the foot of the plate to the edge. We just want it to kind of slope down in there. So be careful as you're smoothing that area. Once you have the foot compressed and the slab is taking on the shape of the plate, then what you're going to want to do is work on this top rim section. So I'm just going to take my sponge and I'm using like this part of my finger as I press into the sponge, just gently applying a little bit of pressure, not getting carried away because we were trying to keep our slab as even as possible. And it helps to kind of hold the plate underneath with your opposite hand. Once you feel like you have it compressed, I like to take my fingertip and I just like to kind of curve it right there on the knuckle along the edge of the rim to get it just a little bit more round. Now that we have the shape of our plate created, we're going to let this set up to the leather hard stage before we transfer our mandala design. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put this inside of our plastic bag. We're not going to spray it with any water. Just find your big trash bag, slide it inside of there, and then seal it closed, and we'll come back to it in a couple days. If you're going to be using something else besides a paper plate, such as a ceramic piece, then you're going to want to cover it with either paper or saran wrap or plastic or a trash bag or something so you have a barrier between the ceramic piece and the clay. Because if not, then your clay is going to stick to this and you're not going to be able to get it off. So I've covered this piece in saran wrap, and notice that I have this slab on top of a board. And that's going to make a little bit more sense here in just a little bit. So now that I have my stencil or my plate that I'm going to use, I'm going to go ahead and cut around this. Notice that my needle tool is straight up and down. You do not want to have this at an angle because you don't want the rim of your plate to have an angle necessarily. So keep your needle tool straight up and down going towards the ceiling, and you're going to cut right around the plate that you are going to use as your mold. Your extra pieces you're going to wedge up, spray it with some clay, and put it in a plastic bag for future use. But don't leave it in slab form, because if you do, it's going to dry out on you. So squeeze it together, then wedge it, put it inside your bag, spray it, and wrap it up nice and tight for future projects that you are going to do. Now that we have our plate and our slab cut out, we're going to take an additional board and we're going to set it right on top of there, and we're going to squeeze the two boards together. So be really careful when you do this, but I'm applying pressure on the sides and I'm going to flip my board, and I should be able to take this right on off of here and have my slab waiting for me. So when you flipped that with the other board, you didn't move the slab on the plate. But if you would have tried to flip this just with your hands, you probably would have moved your slab. So that's a really good trick. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lift up just a little section of our plate here on the side, and we're going to push that air out of there because there was an air bubble between the plate and the clay itself. So we're just pushing that air out. And then once you feel like you have it all out, then you're going to take your sponge and you're going to press your slab into the shape of the existing plate that is right underneath your slab. I'm not applying a whole lot of pressure. I'm just kind of gently pushing my slab to take on that shape. Make sure that your slab's not moving on you though. And if it is, just kind of gently guide it back onto the surface of the plate that's underneath. Be careful that you're not pressing too hard because you don't want your slab to become uneven. But I'm just kind of pressing with my index finger into the foot to take on that plate shape. And notice that I'm kind of holding the sides, always supporting, the opposite wall, so that way the slab doesn't slide off. And once I feel like I have it where it's taken on the shape pretty good, now I'm going to work the rim of the plate. But before I do that, I'm going to clean off my sponge because it's pretty dirty at this point, and I want it to be nice and clean because chances are I'm probably just moving the clay around. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So my next step is to come back to the edge, the rim of the plate, and I'm just going to soften this up. I don't want it to be at a 90-degree angle because that would be really uncomfortable to use. So I'm just, again, using my index finger, and I'm just kind of gently applying just a slight amount of pressure as I go over the edge or the rim of the plate with my sponge. And then the last thing I like to do is take my fingertip, kind of like the area right there at the knuckle, place it on the rim, and just kind of gently rub or smooth right on that rounded section, just to give it a little bit more softness. At this point, you're ready for your clay to stiffen up to get to the leather hard stage before you can transfer your design. So don't spray it, just put it inside a big trash bag and seal it up tight, and we'll come back to it in just a couple days and we'll do our transfer.